This serial killer had a lot of names. Hell's Belle, the Laporte Ghoul, Hell's Princess after a 2018 movie, the Widow of Laporte, and Lady Bluebeard. She was born Brynhild Paulsdottir Storsith in 1859 and was known more commonly as Belle Gunness. Like other female serial killers in the Victorian era, she would be active a very long time. About 24 years, in fact. She probably killed at least 14 people, mostly men, but some estimates put her total body count in the 40s. She may have died in 1908, maybe not. As you'll see, her end is rather a mystery. Gunness was born in Norway, the last child of 8 to Paul and Berit Storseth. When she was just 14, very young by today's standards, she began working at local farms by caring for cattle. She had a goal to move to New York City and finally did make it to America in 1881 at 22 years old. It was when she was going through immigration that she changed her first name to Belle. She moved on to Chicago to live with a sister and brother-in-law. She worked as a servant, then at a butcher shop while in Illinois. She was not a small figure. She was about 5'7" and weighed somewhere between 210 and 250 pounds. She was also very, very strong. She married a man named Mads Sorensen in 1884, and together they owned a candy store. That burned down. Their house also burned down. No worries, though. Insurance paid out on both fires. Belle was also relieved when 2 of her babies died of intestinal inflammation, and insurance paid out on policies on those children as well. Surely Belle was once again grateful when Sorensen died of a cerebral hemorrhage, and insurance would pay out once more. Well, 2 insurance policies paid out. The first was to expire the day Sorensen died, and the second was to become effective on the day he died. So they happened to overlap on that one day. Guinness would tell folks that she gave Sorensen some quinine powder for a headache, and when she checked on him on this only day where the 2 insurance policies overlapped, he was expired. She used the money to move from Illinois to LaPorte, Indiana, where she became a pig farmer. She would meet and marry Peter Gunness in 1902, who had an infant daughter. Just a week after the marriage, while Peter was away, the baby died of undetermined causes. Peter would follow his daughter only 8 months later, with a skull injury. What tale would Gunness tell to explain the skull injury? Well, Peter had reached for something on a high shelf and a meat grinder smashed him in the skull. There was a coroner's inquest because the coroner suspected the meat grinder incident was murder, but the coroner's jury let her go. No worries, though. Peter was well insured for $3,000, which Gunness naturally collected. If anyone is keeping count, that is 6 insurance policy payouts and 5 people so far. It took only some 3 years for the widow Gunness to become lonely enough to start placing marriage ads in newspapers in Chicago. First, Henry Gerholt responded. He was from Wisconsin and traveled to Indiana to meet Gunness and see the pig farm. He wrote back to his family and told them that he liked the farm, that he was healthy, and asked that they send seed potatoes to him. But they never heard from him after that. When they contacted Gunness, she told them that Henry went to Chicago with some horse traders. She retained his travel trunk and a fur overcoat. John Moe from Minnesota was next to answer Gunness's ad. It was 1906, and they wrote back and forth for several months. Moe then withdrew a large amount of cash from the bank and traveled to the farm. He disappeared then. A carpenter who did work now and then at the farm would later swear that Moe's truck stayed at the farm, along with a dozen other vehicles. There were other men who never left her farm. Olaf Svenherud, Ole B. Budsberg, Olaf Lindblom, to name a few. Tragedy just seemed to follow Gunness. This time it would be April 1907 and the farm burned to the ground. Inside the ruins of the farmhouse, authorities found the headless body of an adult woman and the bodies of Gunness's 3 children, Myrtle, 11, Lucy, 9, and Philip, just 5. There was no DNA at the time, no fingerprint analysis, nothing of that sort, and so it was assumed, at least initially, that the headless woman was Gunness. Authorities did not stop with finding those 4 bodies, though. They determined that the bodies had been murdered and left in the basement. Then they heard from the brother of a missing man who had relocated to Laporte. The man, Ashla Helgelin, came to the farm with authorities after showing them letters from Gunness petitioning his brother Andrew to come to the farm, bring money, and keep his relocation a secret. A hired hand, Joe Maxson, went with them and pointed out depressions in the ground in an area that had been turned into a hog pen. Authorities began to dig. In one depression, they found a gunny sack that contained 2 hands, 2 feet, and a head. It was Andrew. The digging would then commence in greater vigor, for there were dozens of similar depressions on the farm. Several burlap sacks were uncovered with torsos and hands, arms, and piles of bone. These were the remains of at least 11 additional people. Bodies all received the same butchering, and quicklime was spread over their faces in a likely attempt to conceal the identity of the victims in the event that anyone ever uncovered them. Most of the remains would never be identified. Current estimates say that up to 40 different sets of remains were found on the property. The former hired hand at the Gunness farm was Ray Lamphere. He was not only Gunness's worker, but also sometimes her lover. He was arrested, wearing John Moe's overcoat and a watch belonging to Henry Gerholt, and convicted of arson. He would later confess that he knew of Gunness's scheme to place ads, lure men to her property, rob, and murder them. He confessed that Gunness asked him to set the fire and to be sure the children were in the house when he did. He would say that the headless woman was another murder victim, a woman from Chicago that Gunness had hired only a few days earlier. And not Gunness. According to Lamphere, Gunness withdrew most of her money from the banks and fled. He drove her from Laporte to nearby Stillwater, where she caught a train to Chicago. Why did she destroy the house? Because a relative of a missing man wrote to her threatening to show up to investigate the disappearance of his brother. However, a journalist would get a second account from Lamphere, which is said to be inconsistent with the official confession. The second account actually came as a written document signed by Lamphere and given to Reverend Edwin Schell while Lamphere was on his deathbed. In this telling, Lamphere allegedly confesses to killing Gunness and the children. He confessed here to having an accomplice, an Elizabeth Smith, who was subsequently arrested. Lamphere would die in prison from tuberculosis, and quite obviously, people are unable to question him about the inconsistencies at that point. So, was Belle Gunness a fugitive, or did she die that day on the farm? Well, the postmortem doctor did not believe so. He testified that the body found in the farmhouse would be at least 5 inches shorter and 50 pounds lighter than Gunness. Other prominent doctors in the area agreed with him. There is no information on whatever might have happened to the head. However, a sluice was built by a former miner to sift through the remains of the fire, resulting in a piece of bridgework being found. It was 2 human teeth with porcelain teeth and gold crown work in between. Gunness's dentist, a Dr. Norton, testified at the coroner's inquest that this was work he had done on Gunness. The coroner's inquest would rule that the body in the fire was in fact Gunness. The jeweler would then testify that the gold would have melted, as other gold in the house did, had it been in the fire, and the teeth would have baked until they crumbled, casting doubt once again on the identity of the body. They even had a blacksmith demonstrate the differences, and Maxon would say he saw the bridge work in the hands of the sluice operator, Klondike Schultz, before it was, quote, discovered, end quote. His testimony was also corroborated by another witness. Sightings of Gunness were reported in Chicago for many years after the fire. Nearly all had been investigated and discounted, but for one, that is. In 1931, a woman going by the name of Esther Carlson was arrested for the murder of August Lindstrom, a man she was caring for. She did the murder to obtain the $2,000 the man had in his bank account. She died in prison before trial and before her identity was proven. 2 former residents of LaPorte viewed the body in the morgue, and both left convinced that they had seen the body of Belle Gunness. A DNA test conducted in 2008 failed because of the age and lack of preservation of the sample that was used. It might have been possible to compare the DNA of the children with Gunness, but that test has not been conducted as far as we are aware. The truth is that her death has never been confirmed, but she was also never tracked down. Gunness may have been setting Lanfear up as well. The day before the fire, she went into town to visit her lawyer, and she asked that he draw up a will leaving all she owned to her children and then to an orphanage in Chicago. She told the lawyer she feared Lanfear would kill her. It was this tip that initially led police to Lanfear, but in reality it might well have been a setup to shine the light on Lanfear so that Gunness could make her escape. Gruesomely, the Gunness farm out on McClung Road became a tourist attraction. The graves were left open for tourists to view. There were concession stands and souvenirs, and even now, there is a permanent Belle Gunness exhibit in LaPorte County. That's it. Until next Saturday. If you're enjoying these videos and want more, don't forget to subscribe and turn on your notifications so that you don't miss any videos. Thank you for watching. We really appreciate it.